Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about Indians being stuck in Sudan in the middle of a national crisis. We also talk about Apple opening its first stores in India and what users can look forward to. But first, we talk about the country's population. According to the United Nations Population Fund, India has now overtaken China to become the most populous nation in the world. But does that mean that India's population is growing at a much faster rate than before and will continue to do so? And does having such a big population necessarily a bad thing? In this segment, we are joined by Indian Express's Esha Roy to answer these questions. So, Esha, a lot of people blame India's problems on the fact that we have a huge population and now officially the biggest population. But is having a big population really a problem?
Well, that's the big question. So what experts have been saying, have been debating actually, is whether it's better to have a larger population or whether it's better to have a smaller population, because there are benefits and disadvantages to both scenarios. In India's case, the government as well as experts as well as UN officials have been talking about India's unique and golden opportunity right now, being the most populous country in the world, and its demographic dividend. Now, what this means essentially is not only India's population very young. I think the median age, according to the UN, it's 28.7 years is the median age of the country. But you have a large number of young people. So 68% of India's very large population is the youth. So this is between 15 and 64 years. So that's the working population. So our advantage over most other countries, and especially countries with a shrinking population, is that we have this huge, large workforce that the government can actually capitalize to drive India's economy forward even more. So that's a huge advantage. Now, whether we can capitalize on this advantage or not, that is the question. For that to happen, what the government will have to do is, in a mission mode, on a war footing, they will have to increase education and skilling of the youth across the country, in particular the rural youth who don't really always have access to job opportunities in the way that the urban youth have. But if this is done on a war footing, then we will even be able to supplant and supplement workforces for other countries. I think earlier this year, Japan signed an MOU with India offering to skill a certain amount of our workforce because they need workers.
Right, Japan is a country where the population is declining and they do not have as many young people as we do.
Exactly. So this is a huge advantage. But there are certain things that need to be done. I mean, if it's going to be business as usual and the government doesn't do anything about it because the onus really is on them to push certain schemes forward, then we may lose out on this advantage completely. For instance, a demographer I was speaking to had said that India's focus so far has been on the service sector, which has benefited the country hugely. It's pushed our economy forward. But with such a large population, we should also be focusing on manufacturing heavily. There should be more labor intensive industries that is able to provide employment to this very large population. And it's only going to be to India's advantage. I mean, China is known for its manufacturing, right? They have utilized their population in a very smart way. So we need to look at things like that. So if these steps are taken, then having such a large population can be, India's golden egg, to be honest.
Right, and talking about population growth, even though India's absolute numbers have increased and we have surpassed China, one would assume that the rate at which India's population is growing is also increasing. But that's not the case, right?
Yes, in recent decades, from the 1990s onwards, India's population growth rate is actually showing a downward trend. So in absolute numbers, yes, we have a very large population, but there have been many projections by different organizations saying that India's population will peak. The UN has said in 2053, other organizations have said in 2048, India's population is likely to peak, after which we will start declining. So we will see a downward trend after that. And projections have said that India's population in 2100 will be 1.1 billion, which is a lot less than the population we have as of today. So, yes, it is a large population, but this is a result of what has happened in the years before. And on a very positive note, we have started a downward movement. It will take about 30 years for the population to stabilize and to reach a comfortable level.
And Esha, what is the reason for this? Why is it that India's population growth rate has actually been declining?
Well, first of all, the reason why India's population grew to begin with, I mean, from if we look at independence onwards, which was India's journey. So from 1947 onwards, there was a steady growth. But once the first government came into power, the Nehru administration immediately put into place a very robust family planning system in the country, which at the time may have been a little controversial, but that and the subsequent advances made in the family planning scheme, the latest being the Mission Parivar Vikas of the new government, has been very, very successful. Access to health services, access to safe abortions, access to contraception, which did not exist in previous decades, that has really lent to this decline in the population growth rate. And this is interestingly across communities. I mean, across religious communities, because, communities behave differently in this country. But experts have seen a decrease in the population growth across all religious communities in India. As a matter of fact, amongst the Muslim, there has been the highest sort of decline in decadal growth, which was higher than the Hindu community at 3.1%. And all the others, the Jains, the Buddhists, Sikhs, Christians, all communities are showing a declining population trend. So that's very good news.
Okay, and from what we understand, India is not alone in this, right? Because according to the UN report, the global population is also on the decline.
Yes, that's right. The global population is on a decline. There are certain areas, of course, this is a very country specific thing, but sub-Saharan Africa, India will continue, like I said, will continue to grow in absolute numbers despite our declining growth rate for the next 30 years. There are areas in Southeast Asia which are likely to continue to grow for a bit. So each country has its own slot of hitting its peak population. But overall, the entire global population is showing a downward trend and population stabilization. As a matter of fact, some countries like Japan have been showing a declining trend. South Korea has the lowest fertility rate in the world. As a matter of fact, its fertility rate dropped even further this year compared to last year. China, interestingly, till last year, China was the most populous country globally. But earlier this year, the Chinese authorities announced that they had 850,000 less people than they did last year. And remarkably, I mean, there are good things, there's a good side to it and a bad side, which is that when a population does start declining, what happens is that it's usually accompanied by an aging population, because people are having fewer and fewer children, but with access to better health facilities and higher standard of living, mortality increases, which is what this UNFPA report, as well as last year's UNFPA report, says, that life expectancy has increased across the world. And that's why we hit the 8 billion mark, and we are likely to hit the 9 billion mark as the global population figure in some time. So life expectancy has increased. Men are living longer, women are living longer. But there is an aging population, but the younger population in many of these countries is shrinking. So there is a severe sort of paucity of skilled labor that these countries are beginning to face and will face in quite a large manner in the near future.
Right, Anisha, when talking about India's population numbers, I mean, these are all projections, right? Because the last census was done in 2011. So we do not have the actual numbers right now. So do we have a sense of how these projections might change when we do end up having the next census?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These are all at the end of the day, these are estimates. We know that India is the most populous country right now, but till the time the census 2021 is not done, we will not know exactly what the population is, exactly what the gender divide is, exactly how many young people in the workforce category, age range we have, how many skilled youth we have, how many unskilled, what the education level is like in different regions of the country as well as the country as a whole. So these are data points which are really essential to be able to formulate a plan, whether it's the center or it's the state governments or even for industry, to be able to develop a plan that can effectively utilize this huge workforce that we could turn to our advantage. So that is an essential. We need to have that census as soon as possible.
And next we talk about the country of Sudan. Last week, a violent conflict broke out between the military and a paramilitary force in Sudan, leaving the African nation in a state of crisis. According to experts, this conflict is about who will eventually get to control the country. So far, more than 200 people have died as a result of the violence, including at least one Indian national. And what is important to note is that there are actually thousands of Indians living in Sudan right now, and which includes 31 people from Karnataka that are stuck in the city of El Fasher. In this segment, my colleague Anwiti Singh speaks to Indian Express's Kiran Parashar about it.
Kiran, can you begin by telling us a bit about what is happening in Sudan right now?
So, Anwiti, basically in Sudan, there is a big fight that has erupted between the army and rapid support forces, one of its powerful paramilitary group. So, both these groups were allies and they together seized to power in 2021 coup. But tensions increased over some proposed integration of rapid support forces into the military. So as this thing started to come into the fore, there was a violence broke out in Sudan, which might even lead to a civil war, where these two groups, the army and the rapid support forces, are now engaged in a fierce fight where there have been a lot of bombings, shell attacks and firing, and a lot of things is happening. And many of the cities of Sudan has been severely hit due to this.
Right, and we understand that a number of Indians are currently stuck in the country right now, including some from Karnataka. Can you tell us who they are and what brought them to Sudan?
As of now, there are thousands of Indians who have migrated or who are working in Sudan in various places. So as of now, the information that I have received from the sources of the Karnataka government is about 181 Karnataka nationals are stuck in various cities of Sudan. Among them, I was able to reach one of the person where about 31 Kannada nationals or Karnataka citizens are stuck in a city named El Fasher in Sudan. So these 31 people belong to a semi-nomadic tribal community called Hakipiki. So historically, these people were into huntings and they were also very good at preparing slings. But as days went on, these people did not get education or other assistance from the government. So these people were selling plastic flowers and masala powders and few of the materials in Karnataka. But as the demand reduced day by day, they started to know that there is a huge demand for Indian Ayurvedic products in African countries. So this is about 15-20 years ago. These Hakipiki tribals started going to Sudan and they started selling Ayurvedic or herbal products in Sudan. They sell hair oils, massage oils, and several other Ayurvedic products in Sudan. So this is something for their livelihood. They go to these African countries and sell these Ayurvedic products of India.
Right. And after this crisis started in the country, what kind of situation do they find themselves in right now?
So what is happening is I was able to contact with one of the tribal of Karnataka. His name is Yes Prabhu. He is living in El Fasher. So when I spoke to him, he said that they already were out of food and water also. He said that they led a life of 3-4 days without food. But what happens is whenever they find some food or water in the area, so they go and try to buy it and come back to their houses. So they live in a small housing complex where 31 Karnataka people reside. So the water prices in Sudan is very different. Like for 1.5 liter of water, you will have to pay 81 rupees in Indian currency. So for rice, you will have to pay nearly somewhere around 300 rupees for a kg in Indian currency. So this is the condition there. And the thing is, these people are unable to get out of their house also. And at the same time, these people are using the sump water to drink. They haven't taken bath or they haven't used whatever the stored water for other purposes, but only for drinking purpose. So this is the situation there, and there is totally no clarity of how the situation would unfold in the future. So it has led to a lot of fear among the Indians living in Sudan and others as well.
And Kiran, do these people from Karnataka, a lot of whom have gone there to sell Ayurvedic products, are they with their children and other members of the family as well?
So Anviti, among the population that these people have went, I was able to talk to one couple named Prabhu and Sonia. What they say is there are people who have come with their children. There are people who are aged who have come there. And besides these people who have been to Sudan to sell the Ayurvedic products, there are also other people who are there in Sudan presently. And also there have been reports that one Indian national has died in this firing incident.
And has there been any update from India or even the state of Karnataka regarding the possibility of rescuing these people from Sudan? Have we heard anything regarding that?
On Tuesday, former Chief Minister Siddaramaiah in a tweet demanded the central government, union government and Ministry of External Affairs and also Karnataka Chief Minister to immediately intervene and ensure the safe return of these Kannada people who are stuck in Sudan. And also he asked them to take necessary actions and also to reach out to the international agencies to ensure the well-being of these Hakipikis. Whereas External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar responded to Siddaramaiah's tweet stating, simply upheld at your tweet, there are lives at stake, don't do politics. Since the fighting started on April 14th, the Embassy of India in Khartoum has been constantly in touch with most Indian nationals and PIOs in Sudan. Their details and locations cannot be made public for security reasons. Their movement is constrained by fierce fighting that is ongoing. Plans regarding them have to take into account a very complicated security scenario. The embassy is in constant touch with ministry in that regard. It is grossly irresponsible of you to politicize their situation. No electoral goal justifies endangering Indians abroad. So it took a political turn altogether with the tweet of S. Jaishankar, with Karnataka Assembly elections around the corner.
Now, shortly after this recording, India said that the ground situation in Sudan is very tense and it is in touch with various countries to ensure the safety of Indians. Adding that External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will be meeting the UN Secretary General in New York regarding the situation. And in the end, we talk about Apple opening its own retail stores in India. India's first two Apple stores opened within a span of 2 days. The first located in Mumbai's Bandra Kurla complex and the other in New Delhi's Saket. Now, this development has made a lot of news. But why is this a big deal? Indian Express's Nandagopal Rajan joins my colleague Rahel Philipose to answer this question.
So Nandu, why is Apple opening its own retail stores in India such a big deal?
So Apple has been in India for 25 years and having that store coming in, and we have been talking about it for many years now, is maybe the last part of the puzzle in a way when you look at Apple's presence in India. So with the retail stores coming in, now these are 100% owned and operated by Apple stores. So with the stores coming in, Apple has now become a full stack player. So it does everything from manufacturing the product in India to selling it in India without anybody else coming in between. So that makes it a full stack player, which also signifies that India is now a very crucial market for Apple, especially from a growth perspective.
Okay, but why is it that Apple's only been able to open its own stores now?
So it's sort of come 5 years in a way after Apple switched gears in India. So 2017, two important things happened as far as Apple goes in India. 2017 is when it started its app accelerator in India, where it was helping the Indian developer ecosystem to create products for the Apple ecosystem, but also sort of become successful in that sense. And 2017 is also when it starts moving its first manufacturing to India, maybe with slightly older devices. If I remember right, it was the first phone to be made here was the iPhone 6 or the iPhone 7. But now in 2023, at least one or two of the latest phones are also made in India. So it's made that transition. Now, 5 years after that is when Apple is actually launching its store in India. The store might have come earlier, but there were regulatory restrictions on single brand retail in India, and that was lifted maybe about a year back. So that's why Apple now can own it.
Before 2016, India's foreign direct investment policy didn't allow foreign companies like Apple to set up their own retail stores. But then in 2016, the center announced a new FDI policy and relaxed several of the norms that prohibited foreign companies from setting up shop here. This policy change eventually allowed Apple to set up its own shops and manufacturing units in India.
So earlier it used to have stores along with partners like Imagine or Future World, but now it can do it itself. See, it's also unprecedented in a way what's happened this week. It's actually opened 2 stores in a span of 3 days, which doesn't happen. An Apple store, even for the other markets, happens once in a year kind of a thing. So this also signifies the kind of importance Apple has given to the India market. And I wouldn't be surprised that in a couple of years, maybe at least all big metros in India, certainly Bangalore and Hyderabad, and Bangalore being where Apple has a lot of its other work happening, get an Apple store.
Right. And the in-store experience is pretty integral to the Apple brand, right? What can Apple users in India expect with these new stores opening?
So Apple stores are very unique, and the first Apple store opened in 2001, and Steve Jobs said very clearly, it is not about talking about, megahertz and all of that. We didn't have gigahertz then. We're talking still in the MB terms. And he said it is not about giving that specs and all of that. It's about letting customers experience what you have. And this is very unique because if you walk into an Apple store, and the first time I walked into an Apple store maybe a decade back, I was so surprised that the first thing that you notice is that there is no point of sale. There are no queues. There are no billing counters, right? It is just products. You can spend hours in an Apple store, maybe playing a game, figuring out how to use FCP or Photoshop on a Mac, or just speaking to a Apple genius on how to maybe take a better photograph or whatever. And they will not kick you out. And you have no intention to buy anything.
Right. So it's all about the experience.
Yes, it is about experience. It is just enjoy the products. It is about just hanging around. In fact, they have this very interesting concept called Today at Apple. So basically every day they would have people, who are basically explaining something, of course, using Apple devices, like how to draw using an iPad, how to take better pictures with a smartphone. These are experts. These are artists. And that's again like a classroom. You can just sit there and learn. A lot of people do pre-book to be there and they just spend time there. So even in the Delhi store, which opened now, I think they have hired a lot of artists. I'm sure Bombay store also has a lot of artists. And see, this is what creates the brand. This is what creates the community. The products are in a way secondary. The products are sort of adding to that aura. And that is why you see people queue up. Now, every smartphone company, every tech company wants that community to be there because they think that community is their minimum guarantee when it comes to new products, right? So if you have a community of say a few million, which means that an X number of people will buy a new product every time you launch it. But that community building doesn't happen just with products. It happens with experiences, with having that community building exercises in a way which take years to, and Apple has sort of mastered that art.
Okay, and Nandu, you visited the store in New Delhi. What was it like?
Like with Apple, the store is also in a way templatized. How the tables are designed, the tables are actually made in India. How products are kept on the table and what do they show on the screens of the products. How the geniuses talk to you. Everything is sort of templatized, choreographed, and these guys are trained. Like I could make out that a lot of the people in the Saket store had been flown in from different parts, different Apple stores across the world to train the new set of people, right? But which also, in a way, sets this as a very integral part of their overall Apple Store ecosystem. So you cannot have that thing that, hey, you've been to a store in Singapore or Dubai or even in the US and the experience is different. I don't think that's going to happen. It is very similar. In fact, it is the same as I would have experienced in any other store. The difference between the Saket store and the Mumbai store is the Saket is just an Apple store. And the Mumbai one is a flagship store. That's huge. It has much more features and everything. Saket is more of a very regular Apple retail store. And Apple has 500 of these across the world. But your experience will be similar wherever you walk into an Apple store.
Right. And Nandu, India is an extremely price-sensitive market. Considering that, where do Apple products, which of course are known to have a pretty hefty price tag, where do these stand in the Indian smartphone market?
So Apple has always been a very premium player in the Indian market, unlike the US or Australia, where Apple is the biggest smartphone vendor. In India, it has been a 2%, 3% kind of player. But what happens with Apple's 2%, 3% is that in value terms, it is maybe much more valuable. At one point, I remember it had a single digit 2% kind of a market share, but it was actually making more money than Xiaomi, which was maybe at that time the largest smartphone seller in India. The average price of an Apple device would be 5 times more than the costliest Xiaomi device. So in that sense, they pull in much more value than their market share. But I think that strategy will also change gradually. It will start going towards a little bit more massy kind of a space. And you've already seen that with iPhone SE. And the fact that Apple's older devices are much more popular in India than their latest devices. This is not very unique to India, but in India, it makes a lot of sense to actually buy a 2-year-old Apple device. Two things. One is that in 2 years, Apple devices don't really look old or jaded because their design doesn't change too much over the years. And the fact that among all the devices now, it is only an Apple device maybe which you can use for 4-5 years and have some resale value when you try to exchange it at the end of 4-5 years. So in that sense, Indians find a lot of value in the Apple phone. So it sort of works out to be the same in a way.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.